welcome back to Catholic Reboot. This is going to be really quick, really quick. So this is on sainthood, right? So, and I have to tell you, this was brought about by a 7-year-old. So, on our nightly rosary, my granddaughter was asking a catechism type question, and she had asked, what does it take to be a saint? Right? So that's kind of a heavy duty question for a 7-year-old. I think at 7 years old, I was probably more concerned about what is in my lucky charms and what prize I'm going to get, So, but the question was asked. So, what's kind of interesting is we have a lot of adults on that rosary Zoom that we have, and we kind of passed it around. So let's talk about what it means to be a saint. Now, many of you may have your favorite saint. Saint John Vianney, Saint Teresa, Saint Joseph, you name it, there's that saint. And as kids growing up, we always put the saints way up there in the hierarchy. That was something of high achievement to become a saint. And appropriately so, because what tended to happen after Vatican II is the watering down of sainthood, I feel, this is my personal opinion, demeaned the classification of sainthood. Okay? Now, let's kind of go through when this process started to happen. All right. So, the process to make someone a saint can't normally start by, according to the Catholic Church, until at least 5 years after their death. So that's one of the requirements. And the reason for that is that certain people, it could be religious, could be an individual, could be a pope. The idea is that if we do it any sooner, maybe our emotions are maybe a little too high, right? So for emotional purposes, the church says at least 5 years following the death, so that everyone can calm down a little bit and ensure that the individual's case can be evaluated objectively, right? So in that case, so we wait this time to determine sainthood. What the Catholic Church had done prior to Vatican II, right, was to wait long enough because there's really no hurry, right? So, for example, Saint Bede, who was a theologian, died in 735, but had to wait to 1164 before being declared a saint, right? In other words, take the sainthood very seriously. Now, the waiting period can be waived by a pope, right? That's according to church, right? The Catholic Church. But Pope Benedict XVI set aside the waiting period for his predecessor, Pope John Paul, in 2005. This was thought to reflect this whole idea that there was this overwhelming support for John Paul II, and the popular grassroots was that he was a holy man. And that's good. That's a good thing. That's not the requirement alone for sainthood. All right. So, in this, I'm trying to be kind, but in this culture of emotionalism, probably the best way I can put it, this rush to sainthood, much like rush to judgment, is not a good thing. Okay? Mostly because what they've done in the past is there were requirements or there were steps necessary to sainthood. Now, the Novus Ordo, or the New Church, would like to say that we're all saints, okay? But I think what they really mean is we're all capable of being saints. Very true. We're all capable. We are also all very capable of being nuclear scientists. We're all very capable of being a doctor, a lawyer. Things happen that just isn't the case. If we start to treat sainthood in that way, it's much like saying, because I have the ambition to be a nuclear scientist, because I imagine it so, I should be so. Well, we would say that's ridiculous. Either you are a nuclear scientist or you're not a nuclear scientist. Very similar that was a very secular example, but very similar in a spiritual way. You could want to be saintly, you could want to be a saint, but does your life reflect that you are, in fact, a saint? Now, why is this important? Let's take one saint. Let's take St. John Bosco. If St. John Bosco wouldn't have suffered the persecution that he went through in his life, he wouldn't have become a saint. St. John Vianney, St. Teresa, I could go on, St. Francis. If they didn't have to suffer the pain in their human coil to become a saint, they would not have been a saint. Okay? It's very, very important. Okay? I guess the way I look at it is, please, you can water down the Catholic faith in many ways, which they have, but when you start watering down sainthood, much like the Mass has been watered down, you have to ask the obvious question, why are you watering it down? Okay? Okay, I'm sorry I went off on a little bit of a tangent. All men and all things are not created equal. If that was the case, then why live a holy, pious life if we are all saints? Okay? All right, now let's get back to the point. John Paul II also dispersed the 5-year period for Mother Teresa. So beginning the process in 1999, less than 2 years after her death. Okay? Now, does that mean we don't love Mother Teresa? Does that mean that we don't think Mother Teresa was a holy woman? No. We love Mother Teresa. We think Mother Teresa's a holy woman. Was she a saint? And the common response will be, oh, well, of course we do. According to what standards? Okay? We got to be very careful we don't take this slippery slope of cultural emotionalism that is very prevalent in our society. And it's not that Mother Teresa couldn't have become a saint, but they should have gone through the same procedures that they have through all the saints throughout the Catholic history. Otherwise, it's almost like this. If you have a testing system whereby certain people are required to pass a certain test in order to get into whatever, medical school, into to law, and then all of a sudden, because of an emotional feeling, you say, well, that's just not necessary. Are you not doing damage to the institutions of medicine and law? Right? Well, sure you are, because what it used to take to practice those professions is no longer required. I would like to draw the comparison, even though it's secular. If no longer need the same requirements to become a saint, then does it matter what it is to be a saint before than it is to be a saint today? Well, of course it does, right? So the first step that is required in becoming a saint is the amount of time, right? And we've already discussed that. How much time do you need to wait before someone can be considered a saint? If you immediately throw that out, then you have to say, okay, what's next? Well, let's look at the second step. Step 2 is they need to become or determine to have become a servant of God. Okay. Once the 5 years are up, which they were already abrogated, okay, so the second step really should never start because the first step was never satisfied, right? But once those 5 years are up, or some sort of specific waiver is granted for not requiring those 5 years, the bishop of the diocese where the person died can open up an investigation into the life of the individual for sainthood to see whether they lived their lives with sufficient holiness and virtue to be considered a saint. Now, this had another connotation in the traditional faith, and they would assign what they called a devil's advocate. Now, the name devil is kind of derogatory, but you all know what we mean when we say I'm playing devil's advocate. In other words, I'm trying to go to the worst case scenario to prove the goodness in something, right? So why would they appoint a devil's advocate? Because this person is going to truly look into their life with no handcuffs, no emotional handcuffs, right? And say, no, let's look at their life. What did they do? Now, what was interesting about the canonization of Pope John Paul II is, quite honestly, there was a lot of controversy when it came to this step, because there was quite a bit during his life that was questionable. So what they did is they changed the rules a little bit and said, no, we're only looking into his life while he was a pope. That's a new invention. Okay, that's a new rule. It is not the case with previous saints. They did not just look at their life when they were a pope. They looked at their entire life. Okay? Now, the reason they changed that, they said, what does it matter if in their position as a pope, their greatest effect on the faithful is as a pope? Well, not true. Their effect is as a priest. Their effect is as a bishop. Their effect is as a cardinal. And then also their effect is as a pope. Okay, you see how this new invention, I call it the spin of the Catholic Church, which is the most dangerous. You can have spin in politics. You can have spin in corporations. You can never have spin in the Catholic Church. Why? Very easily. What is the Catholic Church? It's Christ's church. He doesn't spin. Okay? Now, even if, and I'm using Pope John Paul II as a classic example, even if we say, well, we're only going to look at Pope John Paul II's life as a pope, I think there's enough, if I were the devil's advocate appointed to the case, to say it doesn't qualify for sainthood. I'm sorry. I know this is running against everything as a Catholic. Pope John Paul was involved with the Ecumenical Council of Assisi, where he put all other world religions on the same level as the Catholic Church. Done. Would have never passed muster in the days when they really appointed a devil's advocate to sainthood. And I know this is painful. Explain to me how any other world religion could be brought to the level of Christ's church. Not possible. Let alone allowing these other religious leaders to bless you. What's that saying? Buddha is equal to Christ? Muhammad is equal to Christ? No clarification. Never stepped up and said, now we're coming together ecumenically, but Christ is above all. Never said that. That sainthood's over. Okay? Other religious groups in the diocese can also ask the bishop to open the investigation. Okay? Now I'm giving you all the qualifications under traditional Catholic sainthood, right? Evidence is gathered on one person's life and deeds, including witness testimonies, right? If there is sufficient evidence, the bishop asks the congregation for the causes of sainthood. The department that makes recommendations to the Pope on saints for permission to open the case. You do not fast play this. What is the hurry? Why are we in a hurry to make saints? What are we gaining by classifying somebody as a saint? Matter of fact, I'd go even further. If we do it too hastily, are we potentially destroying it? If you want to go back and really research this, research when Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, our popes, were popes and our popes, when was Pope John the 23rd canonized? When was Pope Paul VI canonized? When was Pope John Paul I canonized? When was Pope Paul II canonized? Lightning speed. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Whenever you see anything go outside the norm and go a little too quick, don't you ask yourself, what are we doing this for? I'm going to tell you personally my feelings. This is not part of the Catholic Church. This is my feelings. The only reason you would move for that many saints in such a short period of time is if you're trying to make a point. And what could the point be that they were trying to make? Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul I, who wasn't even reigning long enough, Pope John Paul II were all popes after what or part of what? Vatican II. If you canonize them, inadvertently, who are you canonizing or what are you canonizing? Vatican II. And I'm sorry, I know this isn't my normal approach to teaching the faith. Vatican II was in so much error that we're dealing with the effects of it today. And if they put all those popes through the process of normal canonization, I would have to say not a single one of them would be determined to be a saint. Okay, now we're going to keep going. So, if there is sufficient evidence, the bishop asks the congregation for the cause of saints. The department that makes recommendations to the Pope on saints for permission to open the case is granted. Now, I've already said that. Why am I repeating it? Because that's when the devil's advocate is doing the most amount of work. Once the case is accepted for consideration, the individual can be called a servant of God. See the steps that are required, okay? Step 3, show proof of a life of heroic virtue. Very, very important. The Congregation for the Causes of Saints scrutinizes the evidence of the candidate's holiness, works, signs that people have been drawn to prayer through their example. If the congregation approves the case, it is passed to the Pope. If the Pope decides that the person lived a life of heroic virtue, they can then be called venerable. Now, of the popes that I provided, they may have gotten to this point. Okay? I would say Pope Paul VI would have already been removed at this point. Okay? All right. If the Pope decides that the person lived a life of heroic virtue, that they can be called venerable. Now let's take each one of the popes, starting with Pope John the 23rd. Did he live a life of heroic virtue? What? What specifically did Pope John the 23rd do that demonstrated that? Heroic. Heroic is a very important word, okay? Did Pope Paul VI demonstrate a life of heroic virtue? Now, I would say at this point, this is probably where Pope John Paul II did. I think due to his involvement being a priest, a bishop, and a cardinal during the communist years, he would have passed the test of heroic virtue. Okay? And that's a very important point, because if you stop and think about it, would you compare what Pope John Paul II had to endure comparable to what Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul VI had to endure? No. No. Not even close. Okay? You see how when you water things down and you make everything common, then nothing is great. Everything is great. So if everything is great, then nothing can be great. So now we're at the stage, now remember, we went from servant of God, the first step, to the next step, which was venerable. These are steps, right? So popes who have been bestowed the title of venerable include Pope Paul VI and Pius XII. Okay? I would say Pius XII for sure, because what he had to endure during World War II, which was a traumatic period, and especially what the church had to go through during the Nazi rule and the fascist rule of Mussolini. There was a lot of heroism on the point of Pius XII, especially trying to protect many Jewish people, right? Pope Paul VI, don't know what that is. Now, other venerable individuals include Irish nun Catherine McAuley, who founded the Sisters of Mercy congregation, and Scottish nun Margaret Sinclair. Step 4, verified miracles. This step is very important. Not perceived miracles, not we think it was a miracle, but verified miracles. Now, to reach this stage, beatification is what we're approaching. So a miracle needs to be attributed to prayers made to the individual after their death, right? The prayers being granted are seen as proof that the individual is already in heaven and therefore able to intercede with God on our behalf. So that's why we pray through the saints to Christ, right? If it's not determined that that's possible, now if you said, well, since you're talking specifically about popes, are you saying none of these popes could have made it to heaven? I'd say absolutely. I think several did not. Now I'm judging, but I can tell you, I don't see the destruction of the traditional Catholic faith during Vatican II as being evidence that there was 100% conviction for the greater glory of God. Okay? So now me just as a individual secular person say they better have to prove that Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul the 6th, who were instrumental in Vatican II, made it to heaven, because they went against 1,500 years of tradition in one fell swoop of 5 years. That's a big question mark. Okay? And not in this touchy-feely Catholic Church that we know today, but the real Catholic Church. Now, incidents that need to be verified by evidence before they are accepted as miracles. Okay? In the case of John Paul II, excuse me, Vatican experts examined the medical evidence for an allegedly miraculous cure of Parkinson's disease of a 49-year-old French nun, Sister Marie Simon Pierre Norman. Sister Marie said that she and her fellow nuns prayed for the intercession of Pope John Paul II after his death. Her sudden cure had no logical medical explanation, the Vatican says. That could be the case of a miracle, right? After beatification, the candidate is given the title of blessed. Do we know the same for Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul the 6th? And quite honestly, it took more than one miracle for previous saints in order for the miracle to be satisfied, but that was waived as well. Okay? But so far, follow me. Let's say the advancement of Pope John Paul II went to blessed. Never understood the advancement of Pope John the 23rd or Pope Paul the 6th. Okay? I'd love to see the evidence of that. Now, there's one exception to the miracle requirement. A martyr, someone who died for their faith, can be beatified without a verified miracle. Now, why is that? Because, in essence, they laid down their life for the faith. Okay, very good exception, right? Canonization is the final step in declaring a deceased person a saint. Now, to reach this stage, a second miracle normally needs to be attributed to prayers made to the candidate after they have been beatified. This is what I'm talking about, more than one miracle. Martyrs, however, only need one verified miracle to become a saint. Okay. Pope John the 23rd get martyred? No. Pope Paul the 6th, was he martyred? No. Was Pope John Paul II martyred? Nope. Okay. The second miracle in Pope John Paul's case was reported to the Vatican to make Pope John Paul II a saint for a serious brain illness which was attributed to Pope John Paul II's intercession. Never verified. And you have to ask the question, who proved that there was a consistent prayer for this? Now, this is why the time period is so important. It takes years of evidence that constant prayers to a certain individual resulted in a miracle. Pope Francis took an unusual step of waiving the requirement of a second miracle in the case of John the 23rd. This was said to be because of the widespread support for John the 23rd's canonization. So wait a minute, hold on. So prior to this, emotionalism had nothing to do with sainthood. Now emotionalism has something to do with sainthood. Really? Okay. Scary. Okay? All right. During the canonization ceremony, the Pope's conduct is that there is a special Mass, reading aloud the individual's life history, and then chanting a prayer in Latin that declares the person a saint. Okay. Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul the 6th don't even clear these bars without emotionalism. Therefore, that prayer doesn't even happen. Okay? We don't jump ahead with a prayer and say, we said the prayer, that person's a saint. So far, the only individual that's close to sainthood, according to these requirements of the church, is maybe Pope John Paul II. Okay? Now, modern canonization ceremonies can attract huge audience. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims are expected to show up for that Sunday canonization. The Vatican says more than 2,500 volunteers will be on hand to distribute 4 million free bottles of water to 150,000 distributed service booklets, right? The Mass will be broadcast on various video screens around the city. The Vatican will also release 2 official pronouncements, and then before you know it, there you have a saint. Okay? Now, the reason I am very disappointed with our church is that if our church can become emotional instead of doctrinal, if our church can become emotional instead of dogmatic, then our church can do anything. If we can make anybody a saint, then we have just made all those saints in our history nothing. Okay? And you really need, as Catholics, to not only defend the faith, but defend the dogma of the faith and the doctrine of the faith, and to allow this kind of usurping of sainthood leads to one thing. You and I are saints. How do you like being a saint? Do you feel you earned being a saint? I know I'm not a saint. My gosh, all they have to do is assign a devil's advocate to my life. I won't make it in the first hour. But you know what the church is saying right now? We're all saints. So if we're all saints, guess what? No one's a saint. God bless you, and see you in the next episode.